With the introduction of the new weapon skills, the missile systems have been vastly improved. It did solve some of the damage application on some ships, but that raises the question, how much was the Raven Striker improved? Now, as you all know, the Raven Striker is known to have the worst damage application out of any Striker battleship, mostly because the siege mode is basically crippling the missiles, and you are not going to be able to apply most of that damage to anything smaller than a capital or a station. The siege mode on this ship has been buffed in one of the last updates. I think it was like 3 or 4 months ago. Meanwhile, the other siege modes on the other Striker battleships have been nerfed. And well, that buff didn't really do much in practical use, but on paper the buff was really big. So it will be time to find out how the Raven will perform after the new skills and after the April balance patch. Now, the trait description of this ship is about the same as it used to be. They haven't changed this so far. It has some very nice damage bonus and activation time, as well as a flight velocity bonus, although the Raven Striker is not the fastest, and the flight velocity bonus in some cases does appear to be useless, but it's always nice to have extra speed. The Raven has 7 high slots. It is a shield tank, a very good shield tank. The Raven is known to be the tankiest Striker battleship, and I would say the main trait on the ship is its tank. It can be really tanky, as I will show you later in this video. It also has a good capacitor, so the Raven's main trait is the tank, although it can also have some very nice DPS. So I have all the relevant missile skills maxed out. So it will be interesting to see how much it actually does help the ship out in combat. On paper, these are some very extensive, very nice buffs for the missiles, although all weapon systems have received a buff, but the missiles have the most notable and most apparent effect. So far, I am a fan of the new skills. They help out a lot in combat, at least for the other ships that I've tested out. Now, this is a PvE build, an old one, triple ballistic controls and 1 missile guidance computer, 2588.73 DPS with the rapid missiles. Now, on paper here, I can tell you that the new skills have kicked in really good. The flight velocity has been increased, the explosion radius has been reduced, the explosion velocity is also increased, and the range has also been increased. Overall, on paper, it looks really solid. Dual Nosferatus, 1 scrambler and 1 web, 1 afterburner, a shield booster, and the other modules that I already mentioned. This is basically a high-sec PvE build only. Don't use this build in low-sec, it's not a low-sec build. The DPS has been improved by about 500, which is very nice. Now, as for the Nano core, you have a lot of options, and if you want extra DPS, then go for the extra missile torpedo damage. But if you want to go with a tank build, then you can go with the extra shield amount or shield booster performance. You have a lot of Nano cores to choose from. My recommendation would be to go with the cheap blue or green or the Concord Pass Nano core. The other Nano cores look nice, but you don't have to go and buy the expensive ones, the Concord Pass cores. The blue cores or the green cores also work really well, and the difference is going to be minimal. But yeah, you have a lot of Nano cores to choose from, and all of them will work just fine on the ship. Except the one that has like a drone bonus. That one is kind of weird, but we're not gonna look at that one. Now, as for the rigs, missiles and drones are one of the 2 weapon systems that can really benefit from integrations. And here I have the old 4P60 integrations that I had on this ship. I focused on DPS, missile damage application, missile speed, and all that good stuff, because with the integrations you can combine all the stats, and on missiles and drones the effect is going to be very noticeable. Meanwhile, the other weapon systems are not really good with integrations, but missiles are a exception. However, if you want maximum DPS, maximum paper DPS, triple activation rigs are the way to go, and I'll show you a cheaper option later on in this video. Now, as for the implants, we have two options, well, three options, but I mostly use two implants: tactical missiles and Warhead charge. Now, as I mentioned 1,000 times before, the tactical missiles are good for PvP because you can point your target with them. It adds 2 extra points, and that is a very nice thing to have, because, you know, all ships out there have a lot of stabs, and having a lot of points is always a good idea. Dual ballistic control general units, but you can adjust any unit that you like. Level 15 or level 30 is basically the optimal, although I would say level 15 to level 20 is best cost effective. Level 30 if you really like the ship and if you have a lot of ESC to waste, and I guess level 45, but level 45 is overkill for all the implants, so it is not necessary. Well then, let's see the active stats of this ship. Now, I remember back in the day, I had about 6,000, 7,000 DPS with a build similar to this one, and I was happy with it, but with the recent new skills and with the balance patch and all things included, the paper DPS on this ship should go up about 20 to 50%, that's my rough estimate, and well, we are about to find that out today. Okay, this looks nice. Primary attribute on the missile implant has been activated. 3,300 DPS, not bad. With the secondary attribute active, 4,200 DPS, also not bad. With the siege mode active, 4,200 DPS, 5,800 DPS with the siege mode, 7,200 with one ballistic control, 8,500 with a second ballistic control, and 9,556.71 DPS with the third ballistic control, which is a significant increase over the previous variation of the Raven Striker that I tested out, but 9.21 meter per second explosion velocity, 148 meter is the explosion radius. Now, this used to be like 0.5 meters, 1 meters a long time ago. Now it's 9.21, but on paper, a 900% boost. But in practical use, it's not going to have a significant effect on anything that is smaller than a capital, and any battleship that is going to be moving is going to be able to tank this easily. But I think if the target is webbed and scrambled and stationary, then you might actually apply the damage, which is a very interesting concept. And now let's take a look at the Warhead charge. Now, the Warhead charge implant is the most satisfying to use because it has sustained DPS, and overall you can switch between damage types. Level 15 and level 30, I would say it's okay, don't have to go at 45. But it kinda is weird that you have to go to the level 30 to unlock the extra missiles, and I don't like that about this implant. Wish that level 15 would unlock all missiles, but yeah, it is what it is, so I just have to work with that. 2,500 DPS, which is again really good. With the long range mode, you will have about 86.4 kilometer range with the missiles, which is again pretty solid range. You also have the precision mode, which will improve the damage application, 92.12 and 36.9 meters. Okay, not bad, actually pretty good. The stats are actually really good for the Raven Striker if it's not in the siege mode. The missiles do have some very nasty application now. 3,200 DPS with the damage mode, with the siege mode active. The paper DPS skyrockets, 4,469.31, But the damage application falls off significantly. 9.21 meter per second is the explosion velocity, and when we activate the precision mode, 73.81 meter is the explosion radius, which again, it's not going to apply a lot to anything that's small, moving fast, or even big and moving fast, because you will be able to outrun the missile explosion. And 10.58 meter per second when the missile guidance computer is active, which again doesn't really do much in the actual use, in actual combat. 6.4 thousand DPS and 7.2 thousand DPS when all three ballistic controls are active. And when the implant is removed, 5.8 thousand DPS, which again is pretty good. And there is a nice increase in the paper DPS of the ship, although there has been improvement in the explosion velocity, in the explosion radius and missile speed, but the improvements are insignificant on the grand scale because the siege mode still cripples the missiles. And I think it kinda should do that because the striker battleships are mostly designed to shoot at structures and to shoot at the capital ships, so it does fall well within that role. It will apply the damage really good against structures and against big capital ships. Now this is a long range build, can be used for PvP and for PvE, but it's more designed to be used in a fleet. And now let me go to the tactical missiles. The cruise missiles have very nice DPS, have very nice alpha damage, but the damage application even on smaller ships will be a little bit bad, so mostly designed to be used against big ships, battlecruisers, battleships and capital ships. You will be doing some pretty good damage to the capitals using the siege mode, so in that aspect the Revenant Striker will be working really well. The target painters will increase the signature of the target so that it's going to apply a bit more damage to it. Okay, everything is adjusted. Let's turn off the siege mode so that I can show you the cold DPS. 2.8 thousand, which honestly is good. Again, a very nice increase from last time. And the stats look very nice. 173 kilometer range, which is again a very good improvement. 9.1 kilometer per second is the missile velocity. The tank is the best tank out of the 4 striker battleships. After all, the Raven is the tankiest. It has a lot of shield, and I love the tank on this thing. It is really good. Okay, 5.1 thousand DPS with the implant active, with the secondary attribute 6.4 thousand DPS. On paper, fantastic. 7.8 thousand DPS. Then let's go with the second one, 9.3 thousand DPS, and with the third one, 10,386.09 DPS, which again on paper is fantastic, and it will wreck capitals. I cannot wait to see like 50 Raven Strikers shoot at a capital. This is going to be very nasty. I can see this working really well, and the alpha damage is much better than the alpha damage on the Apocalypse, and missiles will not suffer on armor, unlike the latest where they lose a significant portion of their DPS once they hit armor. Lasers are good to blow up shield tank ships, but they're not that good for blowing up armor tanks. Meanwhile, I think missiles will be able to yeet shields as well as armor, especially if you can swap between the damage types, so that makes them quite interesting. Let's take a look at the long range mode. 226 kilometers, really good. 89.62 and 177 meters. Okay, let's take a look at the precision mode. 88.5 meters, 89.62 meters per second. So yeah, it does apply full damage there. Let's go to the damage mode. 3.4 thousand DPS. Okay, siege mode is up. Let's take a look at the DPS now. 4.8 thousand DPS, very solid. Let's quickly take a look at the tank. By the way, 727,000 hit points, 80, 86, 88 and 90%. Again, really tanky. 72,000 shield hit points. So you have a lot of buffer tank on this thing, and it makes it good for low sec combat, makes it good for the glass cannon build. Should work really well. 5.9 thousand, almost 6,000 DPS with one ballistic control. 7,064.81 DPS with the second ballistic control, and with the third one 7,067.33, which is sustained, very sustained, but 8.96 meter per second explosion velocity and radius is huge. So yeah, mostly good against capitals and against structures. That's where the damage will be applied 100%. Well, let's dock and let me show you some more builds. Now with the torpedo launchers. This is a PvP build with triple scramblers. 30.75 kilometer is the range, and this is in the siege mode, so the explosion velocity is not that good, but it would be interesting to see the stats outside of the siege mode. It should be able to blow up a battleship quite easily if you are not using the siege mode, or if you plan to use the siege mode, make sure that the battleship is nicely webbed and scrambled so that they don't move much, and then you might apply pretty good damage to it even in the siege mode. But again, that explosion radius and explosion velocity is really bad in the siege mode. However, it should wreck capitals, at least the average capital. A brick tank super chunk will be able to tank this. We'll be able to tank 50 of those as well. 578 meter per second is the speed with afterburn. Again, this thing is not the fastest, so that's why I'm saying that the speed bonus is a little bit weird, but I guess it's nice to have some speed on most ships. 6,023.56 DPS. 7.5 thousand DPS, 7,500.13 to be more accurate, 9,191, 10,928.33, and with the third one, 12,177.12 DPS. Again, on paper, this is some fantastic DPS, and it should wreck capitals, carriers, dreadnoughts, and structures. However, I'm not so sure how it will perform against a battleship. For example, if the battleship is moving, I believe they will be able to tank this, but if they are webbed and scrambled, then you might apply a lot more damage to it. But on paper, it is fantastic DPS. It's actually kind of crazy how much DPS this thing can have now. They have been really improved, and I can definitely tell you the skills have a good effect on this ship. The raw DPS increase is amazing. However, the damage application could be better. But again, the main role of this ship and the main role of all the strikers is to be primarily used against the big ships and against structures. So having the siege mode to do a lot of damage to sub-capitals is kind of weird, but it works for most of the ships, which is kind of funny. 4.5 thousand DPS, the long range mode, 39.98 kilometers, 40 kilometer range with the torpedoes, very nice. Precision mode, well, with the siege mode active, it's not going to do much, but yeah, does help. And let's go to the full DPS mode now. 5.6 thousand DPS. 483 meter explosion radius. That's a huge explosion. You can technically get in your car and basically outrun the explosion of this ship, and that is kind of funny. Let's take a look at the maximum DPS with the basic control. 6.9 thousand DPS. 8.2 thousand DPS with the second one, and with the third one 9.2 thousand DPS, which is really good. This is with the Warhead charge implant, so the DPS will be sustained. And honestly, I really do like the DPS on this boat. It has been significantly improved. It used to have like 6.9, 7.5 thousand DPS in the past, now 9.2 thousand with the new skills. Overall, I am very, very happy with how the Revenant Strike works now. Could be better, but you know, it's pretty good for a start. Okay, now let me show you a cheaper option for the Raven. So for DPS and for missiles, you have a lot of options. Now I usually go with triple loading bay accelerators for maximum possible pay per DPS, but for this ship you can do a combo where you improve the explosion velocity, the missile explosion velocity, the missile speed, and you can basically focus on missile damage application, or you can focus on paper missile DPS. It really depends on what type of Raven you want to build. So that is a couple ways how to build this ship. Now, if you go with the normal rigs, then you might notice that the missile parameters will be slightly reduced. Basically, you will have to sacrifice the other stats if you go with normal rigs. And this is why I like to use integrations on missiles, because I can combine multiple rigs into one rig and basically have a all around good. I can have all around good stats on the missiles. My apologies for the weird stuttering. My vocal cords are kicking the bucket here, so I'm trying not to lose my voice here. Okay, 4.9 thousand DPS, and here you can definitely notice a significant, I would say, reduction in the other stats, but the paper DPS has been significantly improved. And I think the DPS should be greatly improved now. I believe I'll hit over 13,000 DPS with this current build. 10,002.83 with the second one, 11,895, and with the third one 13,025.55. So I got a bit more pay per DPS, but I have reduced all the other missile parameters. And for missiles, pay per DPS is nice, but pay per DPS is not everything. 744 meter is the explosion radius. Oh my god, that's big. That's a huge explosion radius, and 9.23 meter per second explosion velocity. Quite slow, but yeah, should still apply damage to capitals and structures, which is the main goal for this ship. So in that aspect, it's pretty good, but again, sub-capitals, it might not apply that much damage. And now let me change the implant again, and let's take a look at the same build, but with a different implant, this time with the Warhead charge. And this is why I actually prefer to have more missile damage application over paper DPS, because you can have a ship with 20,000 DPS, but it applies like, let's say, 50% DPS, so it applies 10,000 DPS, so your real DPS will be 10,000. And on the other hand, you can have a ship with like 12,000 DPS with 100% damage application, and you apply 12,000 DPS on that ship. So this ship has higher paper DPS, but a ship with higher damage application and lower DPS and lower paper DPS will actually do more damage than the ship with the higher paper DPS. So that's why I usually prefer the other missile parameters over the raw damage output. 10,032.96 DPS, again, it's really good and should wreck capitals and should wreck structures easily. 7.1 meter per second explosion velocity, yeah. If you can run 60 kilometers per hour, you will be able to outrun the explosion, which is very slow when you think about it. And now for a tank build. First I'll show you the more expensive version and then I'll show you the cheap version. I focused on maximum resistance and I also focused on shield volume. And well, this is a build that I use on my Macario from time to time. A passive shield trunk works really good on strikers because of the siege mode. You can get that extra DPS without sacrificing the tank, and that's fantastic. Let's undock and let me show you the active stats of this ship.
Undocking.
Should be pretty interesting. And I expect some very good stats out of this thing. You can do a lot of different integration rig setups. This is more for a passive tank, passive PvP tank, but you can also do a active tank if you like. Both work really well. 750,000 hit points, 85, 89, 91 and 87%. 97,000 hit points, which is again really solid. The DPS is fantastic for the tank. I mean, this is a tank build now and I still have some terrifying DPS, so I'm not complaining about that. 2.2 million hit points with the damage control active. Can be used in a fleet, can be used in solo operations.
Accepted.
Both work very well. And this build, the old school trunk build with triple extenders, still works really good, by the way. You can have a lot of buffer, and with this build we can also use some neutralizers. The neutralizers will be very helpful against smaller targets like cruisers, interceptors, frigates, battle cruisers. It can also help against battleships. And I can slap a extender general unit, which will improve the shield volume of the extenders, and that will give me a lot more buffer, so the ship will be a lot tankier. 371,000 hit points, 135,000 hit points in the shield.
Undocking.
That is a lot of shield. And let's see the active stats now. I really like the passive tanks nowadays. They have been improved. The passive shield regeneration has also been improved, and very soon we will be able to do the passive regeneration shield tank, and I love that one. 869,000 hit points, 82, 87, 89 and 83% resistance. Really solid. You can also click on the extenders for the extra buffer if required, although the effect has been nerfed a long time ago, but still you get a very nice little extra shield per extender, and they can be very helpful.
Docking request accepted.
You can also use a yellow hardener against lasers and railguns, which should give you a lot more resistance, and you can also do a damage control, which will give you overall a 8.64% boost on all damage types on shield, armor and hull, and it gives you a 13-second panic button, which can be very helpful against high DPS implants, can be very helpful against a lot of ships and a lot of incoming DPS, so that you can last for as long as possible. Works really well if you have a logistic ship at your side, can be used for solo, can be used for a fleet. It works in both scenarios. 873,000 hit points, 84, 88, 90 and 84%, 122,000 hit points. The capacitor is stable, and overall I like how the stats on this thing look. Very tanky, can be used as a bait as well. And now let's take a look at the damage control. 2.5 million, almost 2.6 million hit points, 94, 96, 97 and 95% resistance. This is very nice, and it should last for a very long time against a lot of ships. And now let me dock and let me change the build one more time. So I didn't show you the cheaper version, and I'll do that just now. Let me quickly remove the integrations. Now, if you go for a tank, it is more than enough to cover the shield resistance holes. That means cover EM, cover thermal, and cover kinetic. However, you can do dual EM and one thermal, or you can do dual EM, one extra kinetic or thermal. So you have a lot of options here. You can also increase the shield volume with the core field extenders, but I prefer to have resistance over shield hit points unless I can cover the resistance with the rigs, and then I can use the extenders and adaptive hardeners so that I can have the best of both worlds. And let me show you the active stats of the cheaper version. Now the resistances will be about the same. I think there's going to be a small hole in kinetic, but it's not going to be anything serious. Oh, it's actually a hole on EM 81, 86, 89 and 84, which honestly is not that bad, only 5% difference. You have 98,000 shield, so you will still have a lot of shield and you still have some good stats. And for the price, I would say it's actually really good. 1.8 million hit points when the damage control is active, which is still really solid. And keep in mind, this is a cheap build, so the difference for the price is not that impressive between the integration rigs and with the cheaper option, but you can do both, and it really depends on what type of ship you want to build.
Warp drive
okay,
active.
let's go and see how the Raven will perform in combat. Now, for PvE, I would prefer to use rapid missiles, although if you like to snipe, then I guess a snipe build with the cruise missiles will be nice as well. However, with the cruise missiles at long range, never use the siege mode, because the siege mode is not going to do much against the smaller targets. And well, the question is, how much is the siege mode performing in PvE, in this case, against the smaller targets first? Well, let's find out. Siege mode is active and my target will be that Vex or 2. I swapped to the thermal missiles so that I can shoot them at the resistance hole, and as you can see, I am not doing a lot of damage. The applied damage is equaling the damage that my Converter 2 did yesterday, with about 500 DPS. So yeah, currently I am applying about 500 DPS, which is only about 10% of the total DPS that this ship has, which is funny. So currently in the siege mode you are applying about 10% of your total DPS. Yeah, about 10%, 5022 DPS. And that is not that good. And that is damage application on a cruiser. On a frigate it applies about 3 to 5%, which is even worse. And let's see, yeah, outside of the siege mode it pops frigates as expected, because it applies almost full damage. Against battle cruisers it applies about 30, 35, 40%, I guess, which is better than 10%, but it's still not good. If the ship was moving faster, then the damage application would be significantly lower. And now let's take a look at the battleship. Well, it applies 70%, I would say, 30-50%, something like that. And when the siege mode is off, it applies. Now it applies full when the siege mode is off, but when the siege mode is up, it applies about 40-50%. Mostly because the ship is moving. So yeah, you don't want to use the siege mode in PvE, or your DPS will be significantly reduced. But that doesn't mean that the ship is bad for PvE. It does some really nice damage when you have the siege mode off, and when you have this build with full DPS, it actually does slap really well, and I like the alpha damage on it. It applies about the same. I would say it does feel like the Typhoon. It feels like it does a bit more damage than the Typhoon. However, I believe that the Typhoon is still applying a bit more, and after all, you have to remember that it is much easier to skill into the Typhoon. But the Typhoon 2 isn't as tanky as the Raven, so the Raven has the tank advantage, a big tank advantage. Meanwhile, the Typhoon 2 has the speed advantage. Well, I have to say, the Raven Striker is definitely better now. The siege mode does have improvements. I cannot say that the siege mode is the same as it used to be, because the damage that you do with the siege mode has been improved, and I can tell you it's been improved in a notable way. But it is still better to use this ship, at least when you're shooting at, you know, battleships, cruisers. Don't use the siege mode against them. But if you're shooting at the big boats, let's say a webbed and heavily target painted battleship, then you can technically use the siege mode, but I would still most likely prefer the normal mode. But against big boats, very big boats like the carriers, dreadnoughts, titans, super carriers, and things like that, then you can use the siege mode, because you will be applying damage to them, and a lot of these ships in a fleet, like 50-60 of them, can cripple a average build tank dreadnought. But the recent dreadnought kills that I have seen were kind of weird and funny. There was a Phoenix that had believe it or not, the Phoenix had a cursed build. Small or medium armor repairer, small capacity battery, a large booster, something like that. It was very weird. And most capitals that I see that get killed by battleships, that is, of course, not in a big CTA fleet, were weirdly built dreadnoughts, or basically dreadnoughts with 8 tracking computers, so you can kill the capitals with a bunch of battleships easily if you catch the right one. A properly tank built dreadnought like my Revelation or my friend's Naglfar or my friend's Moros is going to be a challenge, because these things tank a lot of damage, and you are going to be very vulnerable if you don't have E-warships at your side, because the Revelation can slap for 100,000, 200,000 for example, and if you have a glass build, then your ship will be melted in a couple hits, especially since the siege mode does increase your own signature radius. So overall, definitely a interesting ship for a fleet, and can be very good for a PvE boat. Just don't touch the siege mode. And it also can be very good for a solo low sec or no sec PvP boat. Can be an amazing bait, especially with the tank build, and especially if you have support nearby. If you have support nearby, and if you're trying to bait someone to aggro, or if you're trying to smash a gate camp, then the Raven Striker is definitely one such ship that can easily do that. It's quite interesting in that aspect. The other strikers can do the same, but I believe the Raven's tank is just so much better, and the tank alone allows you to do a lot of things with it, and I like it. So, am I happy with the Raven Striker? Well, I'm very happy with the ship's performance. It performs much better than it used to. The siege mode does have some improvements, but it is still not that good to be used against sub-capitals. The damage increase on the siege mode is
Warp
notable,
drive active.
but it is still not that good to be used against the small targets. In some special occasions, yeah, you can use it, but for the most part, just stick to the normal modes, and this ship should be doing an immense amount of damage. It is a good ship, a tanky ship, can have a lot of very nice DPS, and overall I would say the Raven Striker is now much more fun to fly, and I actually enjoyed flying the ship a lot today. So, with that being said, hope that you guys have enjoyed. If you would like to support me, feel free to like and subscribe, and with that being said, stay safe, fly safe, and I'll see you next time.